Hey everyone, welcome back to the Untrivial Podcast. My name is Allie Nelson. I'm back from Florida and we have a very busy week ahead as we're gearing up for Easter weekend. We are going to Montreal and introducing my son to all of my extended family. And so, really excited for everyone to meet him. And speaking of babies and family, this week's episode is all about parenting in 2025. My guest today is Lexi Bradley. Lexi is a psychological counselor with a master's degree in psychology, specializing in family therapy and conscious parenting. With over 12 years in private practice, Lexi is deeply committed to supporting families and also volunteers with marginalized communities in Cape Town, South Africa. Today, we discuss what exactly is conscious parenting, how parenting practices have evolved since our parents' generation, how to discipline your child without punishment, self-regulation and co-regulation during meltdowns, connection before correction, and so much more. If you are someone who is a parent or is curious about the most up-to-date parenting practices backed by research and informed by psychology and neuroscience, Lexi is such a great resource, and hopefully you enjoy our conversation together. And now, let's get into the episode. Lexi Bradley, welcome to the Untrivial Podcast. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Annie. I'm doing very well, thank you. It's hot here in South Africa, but we can't complain.
Yes, thank you for joining us all the way from South Africa. That's something I love about these podcasts is like being able to connect with anyone in the world. And so thank you so much for being here. I would love if you could share a little bit about your background for those who aren't familiar with you.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm living in South Africa. You'll hear everyone says, but where are you from? Because I've got a bit of an accent, but I was born in England, but I moved here when I was 13. So that clears up the accent issue. I'm a counselor. So I've been working in the mental health field for 15 years or something. And my career's been a bit of an evolution. So I started with doing all kinds of counseling, and then there was a primary need for play therapy in my area. So then I ended up doing primarily play therapy. And then from there, it evolved into parenting therapy. So my specialty, my special interest, my passion is actually parenting therapy, and in particular, conscious parenting. But when I say parenting therapy, I don't actually just mean for parents. So it's also something we call reparenting, which is working with adults to work through their childhood trauma and to actually reparent themselves and teach themselves how to self-regulate. So it's not just parents that I'm working with, but I do have a particular passion for parents with young children. I think because I'm in that phase of life myself with young children, and so I can relate to it. And that's kind of me in a nutshell. I've got a research master's in, at the time, called it positive parenting, but I don't want to get caught up in the labels because there's conscious parenting, gentle parenting, positive parenting. I think it embodies the same ethos. So what I call it at the moment is conscious parenting, but I don't want people listening to get caught up in the labels because it's really all about being respectful and intentional.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for walking us through that. There's already so many things you mentioned that I just can't wait to get into with you. But let's start with where you were originally in your career. So, play therapy. What is play therapy? What is that all about?
So the language of children is play. So children don't know how to say, I'm upset. They say, play with me. And through play, children, I mean, you've got a child yourself. Maybe he's not quite at that phase yet, but through play, children just show you what's going on in their world completely. I mean, when you listen to your child play and you watch them play dollies and play out the scenarios, and sometimes you're like, oh gosh, did I say that? They show you what's going on in their world. So play therapy is a way of a therapist connecting with the child about seeing what's going on in their inner world and then helping them to work through some of the challenges they have. And you get two kinds of play therapy. So you get directive and non-directive. And my personal approach was directive, which means that it is somewhat therapist-led, whereas the non-directive is very child-led. So the therapist wouldn't necessarily ask very direct questions or be necessarily directly addressing an issue. Whereas with me, I would sometimes use activities or techniques to guide the child to talking about something very specific. Whereas in the non-directive, it would be whatever comes up for the child.
That's so interesting. What age do you think a child could have a more direct conversation? Or does it ever transition out of play? If so, when does that take place?
I think the direct conversations in play therapy happen within the context of play. So, for example, you could be playing in a doll's house with the child, and you might say something like, "Oh dear, the daddy's gone out. What does the mummy do?" If you understand the context of something in that child's life. So, it's not necessarily that you're directly questioning them, because when you directly question a child, they clam up. Or you would use sand trays. So, in a sand tray, you get a little tray of sand and you get these things called miniatures. And the child you'll ask them to create their world. And I do it with adults too, even did it on my husband. And they take these miniatures and they make a little scene in the sand. And then you will ask them questions about the scene. And that's actually revealing what's going on in their subconscious. And then you might say something like, "What does the mummy bunny say to the child bunny?" etc. And through that, you would get the answers to what you're looking for. And then, of course, if you're dealing, when I say directive, for example, there was one little boy I was working with that was dealing with bullying. And so we actually created a shield and a sword. And on the shield, we put words that he would use in response to some of the things that the bullies were saying to him, and also spoke about putting up your own inner shield. So it's very playful, but it's also addressing things.
Oh my gosh. I'm just imagining being in your shoes and how heartbreaking that must be sometimes, like hearing just this such innocent, honest approach to some big heavy things that are probably going on in their lives. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, absolutely. But when you ask about at what age can children have a direct approach in terms of talking about their emotions, from a parental perspective, they're never too young.
Hmm.
And because my children have been raised by a therapist, and I am by no means perfect, you'll find out throughout the podcast, they are very able to talk about their emotions, because from the age of them being able to even understand words, we were talking about how we feel. I was telling them when I was frustrated.
Mm-hmm. That brings up a point I want to get into later. But so you've evolved from child focused therapy to more parent focused work. So how did that evolution take place, and what does your day to day look like now as you're working with parents?
So the evolution really happened over a period of time, but I was doing play therapy with a lot of children, and the parents would bring them to my door and collect them from my door, and I would do the work with the child, but nothing was really changing in the environment at home. And the parents weren't being equipped with the skills, because they're
Mm.
not therapists, to actually manage what's happening behaviorally or emotionally at home in the way that it was being managed in the therapy room. So sometimes children have a dysfunctional family, and therefore their approach is actually quite functional to the dysfunction. And so sometimes when you make a child functional in a dysfunctional environment, you actually do them a disservice, because the behaviors and the things that they're doing and what's going on for them emotionally are very self-protective. And so if you're only working with the child and you're not working with the parent, and believe me, I think play therapy is very valuable, but I found that what I was wanting to do more and more was bring the parents in and talk to them and work with them. And then my career sort of evolved to working with families. So then I would go to the parents' home or the guardian's home, and I would work with the family as a whole, again in a playful way. So we would, for example, take a large piece of paper, and I would give the family all different color crayons, and I would say, "I need you to draw a picture together." And from a therapeutic perspective, I'm looking at who takes control, whose color is more predominant, what is the communication like, and it gives me a large insight. Then through play, I would try to teach the parents techniques on how to manage children's emotions and behavior.
Hmm. Oh my gosh. That is so cool. So, in terms of parenting and parenting styles, I think there's been a lot of changes, especially in recent years with millennials and our generation kind of stepping into that role. What has evolved, would you say, most in the past decade or two when it comes to parenting?
Gosh, that's a good question. I think we are starting to understand that children are not small adults.
Mm.
And I think one of the things we've had exposure to that our parents didn't have exposure to is Instagram, social media, parenting books, podcasts, and micro learning, as well as just large dumps of information. I learn a lot from Instagram, from just a 1 minute clip. And our parents didn't have that exposure. So a lot of what they were going on was just the advice that they were being given from their own parents or from people around them. And I think what's changed is our consciousness has evolved as people. and our access to information has evolved. And through that, we have an access to understanding neuroscience in a way that our parents never did. And I mean, we can get into that later, but understanding the child's brain was massive for me because it made everything less personal. And just understanding that children are not mini adults. They don't have the capabilities that you do, but at the same time, they are very capable.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. I've definitely learned so much from social media, and I know it sounds silly, but like TikTok, Instagram, these places where you think, oh, I'm just getting funny content or memes or connecting to my friends. There's actually such a wealth of really, really great information. Granted, you need to make sure you're doing your due diligence because there's a lot of misinformation out there too. But like even yourself, you have the connected parent on Instagram, and I feel like I just learn so much about parenting, about kids from you. But you're right, it's so great to be able to have resources, and knowledge is power. And you brought up an interesting point there, which is, a lot of people previously were learning from maybe their parents, and you talk a lot about breaking generational patterns. And I think so much of those patterns stemmed from just doing what your parents did before, and we don't have to do that anymore. What are your thoughts there?
So this is the reparenting journey and what you call the breaking generational cycles, which I know is somewhat trending at the moment, but it really is so powerful because when we look at psychoanalysis and reparenting, it's never from a blame perspective. We know that for the most part, unless you were in a very abusive situation, your parents did the best they could with the knowledge they had available at the time. But you can do better because you know better. And so breaking generational cycles is about exactly conscious parenting, consciousness, reflecting, being intentional, understanding. And because you know what things felt like for you as a child, you can develop the empathy and the self-awareness to change things for yourself. What that requires, though, is a lot of work. You've got to go into your own past. You've got to go into your own trauma. You've got to go into your own triggers and understand why you behave the way you do, so that you don't bleed over your children that didn't cut you.
Mm-hmm. So is that reparenting piece? It kind of starts with individual work and re-exploration to make sure that that's not coming up with your own kids?
Absolutely. And we operate out of habit. So sometimes it's not necessarily that before we can reflect, but afterwards we can take a pause and we can think about why we reacted as opposed to responded to our child and where that's coming from us. And it's nearly always coming from some kind of childhood script.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So we've heard conscious parenting a couple times in this conversation so far. I know you said let's not get super hung up on the labels, but if we could have maybe a little definition of what conscious parenting is, what would you describe it as?
I like to understand words. So if we take the word conscious, it means awareness. So there's two kinds of awareness. There's self-awareness. Why do I do the things I do? What things trigger me and why? And then there's the awareness of the child. Because I think we get caught up in parenting, especially with the wealth of information that we have, on behavior, and forget that behind the behavior is a little human being, is a soul. And sometimes we get so hyper focused on the behavior that we forget about the human underneath it. And I think what sets conscious parenting apart the most from other parenting styles or ways of parenting is the discipline, because discipline descends from the word disciple, which means to guide, to teach, to lead. And so it's really moving away from the punishment perspective, and we call it connection over control. So it's not about controlling the child's behavior. It's about connecting with the human underneath. And so in conscious parenting, punishment isn't used. So every mistake, every meltdown is a learning opportunity. It's an opportunity to guide your child. And so we say your behavior can be wrong, but there's no bad feelings. There's no wrong feelings. So it's about looking at all behavior as a form of communication, and it usually communicates an unmet need. It's a lot because now I've got to go into my own stuff and deal with my own triggers and what my unmet need is. And then also you're having a meltdown and now I've got to figure out what your unmet need is. And so that is why it's important to do a lot of the work outside of being triggered. But it's really just trying to be respectful of children as people with their own wills and intentions, and also mindful of the fact that you are here to guide and teach this human, and nobody learns anything from being punished.
Mm. That's such a good point you brought up. And something I've been learning too is just that idea that outbursts and meltdowns, like those are developmentally appropriate behaviors for kids. They're not rational little adults, as you said. And so almost even that learning behind, okay, my child isn't being bad, or, my child is not, making me have a hard time. They're having a hard time. But also, this is totally normal for them to be going through and experiencing and behaving as. And so that's such a great point. But for those who are like, okay, I hear you, conscious parenting, let's give an example. Say your child hit their sibling. If you do not punish them, what does that approach and response look like as a parent?
Okay, this is something we're dealing with at the moment. So I've got a feisty 5-year-old and a slightly more passive 3-year-old. So first of all, and it's hard to do in the moment, but if I reflect on it now, what is happening behind the behavior? So if I look at, I'll give you the example of my daughter because it gives you some context. I homeschool my children. I also have a teacher that comes in. So they spend a lot of time together, nearly all their time together, and they really are each other's playmates. My husband works away, so often I'm the primary parent there. And my daughter does often struggle with impulse in terms of hitting when she's very frustrated. If I look at the why behind the behavior, what's the unmet need? At the moment, I think the unmet need is that she's not getting enough of a break from her brother, that she's not getting enough time and attention from me, that one-on-one connection, and that she is looking for my attention in an unhealthy way. I can also often see the buildup. So I hear them playing and I hear her frustration. He doesn't understand the games the way she does. And then the hitting happens. And so I'm not so focused on the hitting. I'm focused on the buildup of frustration. And it's okay for her to be angry, but I need to teach her how to be angry. So absolutely hitting is not acceptable in our household. But she has also got a very immature brain and it's an impulse. And often you can't stop it because the impulse is there and you're frustrating me and I'm irritated and bah.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would do then is we have to set the boundary. I can't just let him hit her brother because I understand that she's frustrated. So what I would do is I would first make sure he's okay, come down to a level and say, I can see you're super frustrated. So that's validation. I can hear that you're frustrated with your brother. He doesn't understand the game. That's hard. Still validating. I cannot allow you to hit him. He is really hurt, and my job is protect him and to protect you. If we can't play nicely together, then I'm going to ask the two of you to play games separately. And usually that's enough for her. We don't need to carry on with the lecture. So yes, some behaviors are not acceptable. Some people mistake conscious parenting with permissive parenting. It's not okay, sweetheart, you're feeling all these big feelings. That's fine. Do whatever you want because I get it. It is very much about boundary setting, but we don't have to set boundaries through punishment. We can set boundaries through empathy and love and validation. So it's about the follow through as well. I don't know if you want to give me another example so that I can maybe explain. So it's always about validating, but then setting the boundary. And then the third thing I like to do is also offer an alternative. So actually just 2 days ago, I found my daughter screaming into a pillow. So what's going on for you? Because I'd given her that alternative behavior in the past that she was then able to use because she's developing and almost turning 6 now to manage her frustration. The problem with punishment is, like I said, it teaches nothing. So if she hits her brother and I tell her, you're not allowed to hit, don't hit, and I hit her, I smack her or whatever you want to call it, what does that teach her? I can hit you, but you can't hit him. I'm going to hit hitting. It's not logical. Or if I say, right, that's it, you're going into timeout. Does that teach her what to do the next time she's angry and frustrated with him? Or does that tell her, I don't want to be around you when you're angry, so suppress your anger? Because a lot of us were sent away when we had big feelings. And so as adults, what we do is suppress those feelings because it's not okay. And we experience a lot of shame when we experience big feelings like anger.
That's such an interesting point you bring up there. And yeah, I was just thinking about timeouts when you were talking because I think, some people do smack or spank their kids. I think it's a lot less than it used to be, but I still think timeout as a form of punishment is still quite popular. And I was going to ask you, what is it really teaching them? I think a well-meaning parent is just trying to say, you go cool down, take a break. That's not acceptable. If you don't want to be put in timeout, which is kind of a bummer, it's not abusive, but it's not fun. If you don't want that next time, then, change your behavior and don't do that thing. But you're saying that doesn't quite work. So can we talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me disclaimer that I used to teach parents how to do timeout. So in terms of my evolution, when we know better, we do better. So I used to be a advocate for timeout. And now I think the whole idea is abhorrent. But let me tell you why. When we send a child away for their behavior, there's a couple of things you said. First of all, if you don't want to be in timeout, don't do that thing next time. But again, looking at neuroscience, a lot of times they didn't mean to do that thing. The hitting, it's often coming out of an impulse, and it's not oh yeah, he's annoying me, I should hit him now. That's how I'll get what I want. And so sometimes it's ineffective anyway because they can't stop that behavior. And it's like you say, it's so developmentally normal. 80% of the things that parents consult me for, I'm like, that's normal. That'll pass on its own. But we don't understand that necessarily. And because parents often aren't honest with each other either. So timeout says, when you feel that way, I don't want to be around you. So go away. No child sits in timeout and goes, yeah, you know what? That was really wrong. I shouldn't do that next time. The other thing is, I see the timeout, and what I used to teach was a minute for every year of their age. I encourage every parent that uses timeout to go and sit themselves wherever they put their child for however many minutes they put their child there doing nothing, and tell me how long it feels. When I talk about regulation, I think the intent of the parent, as you say, is a good intention. I'm sending you there to calm down. That implies what we call self-regulation. So self-regulation is when I'm really worked up and I find a way to calm myself down. Children don't have the ability to self-regulate. In fact, a lot of adults don't either. So what we do with a child is we call it co-regulation. So what we do is time in. I don't even like that word, but that explains what it is. So what is time in? My child is really dysregulated. They're not being naughty. They're dysregulated. Their whole body is filled with cortisol, adrenaline. They are out of control. They're having a meltdown. They don't know how to stop themselves. And I can take them to somewhere that's quieter. And some children want to be held. Some children don't want to be held. I can model to them breathing. I can help them to calm down. And that's called co-regulation. So I share my calm with you so that you can bring your body back to a state of calmness. And only then can we do the teaching moment.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that too, that kids can't even learn lessons or even hear you kind of when they're in that state of dysregulation. And so there's often not even a point of trying to teach a lesson if they're screaming, crying, having a meltdown. Like it won't even go in.
And something that's been helpful to me is to learn something called the 4 R's. So when we use punishment, like timeout or spanking or whatever you want to call it, taking things away, making threats, we tend to incite 4 responses from children. So the one would be revenge. I'm going to get you back. Not now, but I'm going to get you back. And the other one would be rebellion. So that's the kids that pretend they don't care. They laugh at you, which is a shame response, and pretend like nothing is affecting them. And then we've got retreat. So those are the kids that go inside themselves. That's for me. I'm worried about those kids. So they shut down, they go inside of themselves. And, resentment. That's it, resentment. So they sit in timeout and they think, this is so unfair. You know, they don't understand me. They don't see me. The other thing is that there are sometimes good reasons behind children's behavior that we don't give them the opportunity to explain to us. So when my 2 children are having a fight, an argument, the first thing I come in is, whoa, we say hands up. So everyone has to do this. And we go, what's going on here? And not to make an assumption, which I've done in the past, because my older child is feisty, automatically I want to assume that she's done something to her brother. That's why.
Right.
To go, what's going on here, and hear each child out. Because there is often a reason behind why they're behaving the way they are. And sometimes they can explain it to you.
Yeah, for sure. And you brought up an interesting point too, even just this fear-based kind of parenting where there are threats, where there are punishments that feel unfair or, just aren't what the child needs. I'm curious how that evolves over time, because a child will learn probably to just avoid those things. And then you think about as they're getting older, as they're entering their teen years, are they ever going to feel comfortable coming to you if something is going wrong, if they've made a mistake? Like, where do they go? And do you see that style of parenting impact the relationship that the child has with their parent later in life?
Absolutely. So we say little people, little problems, big people, big problems. And the way that you respond to your child now, and I liken the toddlerhood to the teenage years. There's a lot of similarities. I think how your child is as a toddler is often how they might be as a teenager. And we want to create that open, honest communication where instead of our child messing up and going, oh my gosh, mom's going to kill me, dad's going to kill me, they go, oh my gosh, I need to talk to mom about this. I need it to help me with this. So it's about helping children with their emotions and whilst having boundaries, but boundaries can be very lovingly set.
Yeah, I think that is a misconception. And we talked a little bit about it. The misconception around conscious, gentle parenting is that permissiveness or is
Mhm.
not having boundaries or enforcing boundaries. Are there any other misconceptions you feel around conscious parenting? And like, what do you want to just set the record straight on when it comes to this style?
I think it's sometimes seen as an unattainable parenting style. Like you have to be perfect, you have to be this super conscious, enlightened human, and it's unattainable. And that can sometimes feel very intimidating to people. But it's not about not messing up. And you're not always going to be intentional and you are going to be triggered. And I lose my shit with the best of them. And I'm a parenting coach. So, but it is not permissive either. The biggest misconception is the permissiveness. How do you set a boundary? You can do it calmly. So I won't allow you to do that. And if you continue to do that, this is what's going to happen. And then you follow through. But the thing with threats as well is a lot of parents make a lot of threats that are so big they can't follow through with them. And they
Right.
undermine themselves in the long run because the child knows you're not actually going to do that.
Yeah, that's a dangerous spot to get into too. And you just brought up an interesting point around this idea of children understanding why something's happening, that the consequence makes sense.
Mm.
And, something that parents used to say all the time was because I said so, and that not really feeling like it makes sense. Do you have any thoughts just on that sentiment alone?
Absolutely. And I think we underestimate children's ability to understand things. So there's sort of two truths we have to hold when we think about children. Their underdeveloped brain and just how little and how they're figuring out the world. And they've only been on the earth for a few years and they don't understand it, as well as the truth that they are capable. And that the earlier you start talking to them about the whys, the more they understand it. And that it's not necessarily they're going to agree with your reasoning, but when you explain to a child why you're doing something, then it gives them the opportunity to actually grow and learn from that moment.
Mm-hmm.
There are three things we all want. We want to be seen, we want to be heard, and we want to be understood. But we also want to understand.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. One question that just came to mind too is, okay, I'm imagining a listener being like, okay, we're going to be conscious parenting. We are going to lovingly set a boundary. I'm going to regulate myself so I can co regulate with my child. What happens if they cross the line again? Like, do you escalate in terms of the consequence? Or, like, what is the next step if that first attempt didn't work?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It would be great if you could give me an example, just because then I could articulate the boundary.
I mean, yeah, we could even go back to, say you have a 6-year-old, say they're at the playground, your 5-year-old's at the playground, there's other children around, they're trying to interact, and they bite the other child. And you kind of say the boundary, we have to leave if you do this again. They bite another child. You take them away. Obviously, you're going to follow through. But what happens the next time you're at the playground? Are you continuing to set that same boundary, or like, does anything change? Does anything happen when they get home after they've crossed that boundary or line a second time?
Okay, so first of all, again, I'm going to look at why. Is there something consistently happening that is causing the biting? What leads up to the biting? There can be so many reasons. So there could be like an oral fixation, something actually going on with regards to the need to bite. It could be an intolerance to frustration. The child hasn't been given the tools to handle frustration. Therefore, their approach is to bite. So I would be first looking at why. Do we always go to the park before lunch and my child's hungry? All of those things. And because it's a consistent problem, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to sit in the park and go and sit on the bench and talk to the other mothers. You're going to have to actually be involved because you're setting a goal for yourself. You're saying, consistently biting is a problem for my child. How am I going to address it? Because you need to have a plan. Otherwise it happens and you don't know what to do next. And then you're saying, what do I do? Yeah, you've got to follow through. We can't bite our friend. Biting hurts. Your friend is upset. I see that you're frustrated. I see that you wanted the toy. I see that he took it from you. Next time I need you to tell him, I'm frustrated. I want my toy. And if you can't handle it, because the child's 6 now, you can come and ask me and I can help you with it. And then let's say the child bites again. You've set the boundary of, if this continues, we're going to have to leave. Now we have to leave.
Mhm.
And should we have a conversation about it at home? Yes, but not immediately. There's always a time for certain children. Bedtime. My daughter likes to come and sit with me while I bath, and then we have some really good conversations. And then we're going to go like, I've got this problem. You seem to not be able to stop yourself from biting. What do you think that's about for you? And what can we do? And you might say, well, my child doesn't know. But like I said, if you continue to have these conversations, then they start to be able to answer those kind of questions.
Mm.
And then taking this example further, okay, the child says, oh, I just get angry. I can't stop myself from biting. Then I'm going to maybe take a playful approach and say, oh my gosh, how are we going to stop your mouth from biting? What are you going to tell your mouth next time it wants to bite so that we can stop it from biting? Who's in control, you or your mouth? And actually externalize it from the child and approach it that way. What you said about following through with the boundary, I think, again, this misconception about conscious parenting is I don't want my child to be upset. It's quite the opposite. I can follow through with the boundary and not scream and shout about leaving the park, but maybe I do have to pick my kid up as a surfboard kicking and screaming, and I can fully allow them to experience that emotion and probably have to self-regulate at the same time, because there comes a point where your child is having a meltdown where you're not regulated. You're like, I just need this to stop. Just stop crying, stop screaming. And you got to go in and take some breaths and things. The emotion is not the problem. The behavior is. I can allow you to feel all of those feelings, and I can't allow you to hit your friend.
Mm-hmm. No, that's so true. And your point there just about having to self-regulate as your kid is experiencing those emotions, I know could be so hard. Even like, my child's still an infant, and the crying sometimes you're like, it's been a long day and I just need to keep patting and loving and supporting. And sometimes you don't know what it's about. You don't know what to do, but you do have to find your own calm to manage that. And so I wanted to switch gears and talk a little bit about even just managing the stress as a parent, or, say you're even solo parenting, which can be harder if you don't have as much support. Like, do you have any tips or recommendations for people to be able to kind of tune in and be that parent that they want to be, and have those skills so that they can show up for their kids the way we're talking about, where you don't react and you don't explode?
Yeah, I think it's really good, because what I'm hearing you saying through the podcast is like, you've got all these theories, Lexi, but like, what does it actually look like? So let's talk about what self-regulation looks like for us as an adult. Okay, chances are your parent didn't teach you how to be angry or sad. And particularly for women, weren't really allowed to be angry. So what you'll find for a lot of women is when we're angry, we cry, because we don't actually know how to be angry. And then the opposite of men, when they're hurt, they get angry. When they're upset, they get angry. When they're sad, they get angry. So we have these, what I call favorite emotions that come up. Children are sent to this earth to help us heal. And by doing so, they point their fingers in our wounds. And it feels really personal. It's like they're just out to get me today. They're not out to get you. But if you aren't aware of what those wounds are and what is something that triggers you consistently. Like for me, it's whining. I just really struggle with whining. It's that constant, I just gets to a point with me where I start to feel that internal rage coming up when there's consistent whining. And I had to look at where that's coming from for me. And I think it's not necessarily about feeling heard as a child. And I was a whiner. Believe me, I was a whiner. So it's interesting where that comes from. But how do we self-regulate? Your parent didn't co-regulate with you. They either told you to suppress it, or they actually physically jolted you into a state of fight or flight where you froze. And self-regulation as a parent is really hard, because in your life before a parent, you'd be triggered. A colleague would trigger you, and you'd be able to move away from the trigger and then potentially resolve it or suppress it. But when your child triggers you, you got to stay right there in the trigger.
Yeah.
There's no outs. So now you got to sit with your own wound and them screaming, and sensory overload is a thing. So self-regulating is about breathing. Now, some people tell their children to breathe and it triggers my kids. Don't tell them to breathe when they're having a meltdown. So one of the things we want to do is model breathing. So instead of telling them to breathe, you start breathing. Consequences, you feel better. So it's physically in front of them taking deep breaths. You need to help your brain to understand that you are not being attacked, that you are not in fight or flight. So we have the primitive brain and we have the frontal lobe. And Dr. Daniel Siegel does some really good stuff on this if you want to read the whole brain child or look at the whole brain child. But basically, we have this sort of primitive brain, this limbic brain. And then we have our frontal lobe, which is like our logic and our reasoning. And when we are super triggered, this just goes offline, which is the same for kids, which is why when you ask them, what's wrong? What do you need? They don't know. And so when we're triggered and we're in our primitive brain and they're in their primitive brain, we have to find a way to get this back online because they can't do it. And what happens is we go into 3 responses. We go into fight, flight, or freeze. And generally, we primarily have one response. So now your child's having a meltdown in front of you and you get dysregulated. Your body fills with cortisol, adrenaline, the bear's in the cave, you're being attacked. What do you do? And somehow you've got to find a way to bring your nervous system down. And so what you do is you can develop a mantra. One of my mantras is check yourself before you wreck yourself. So I'll say it in my head and to myself. Or some people would like to use the mantra like you're safe, you're not under attack, you're in control, you can share your calm. So you're actually going to go in, try and tune out what's going on here, because you can't co-regulate with your child right now anyway. Tune in with yourself and give yourself a mantra, something you can say to remind yourself that actually you're safe, because you're going back into your child where you didn't feel safe. So your inner child is having a meltdown. Like I'll often say to my daughter afterwards, geez, I had a tantrum there, didn't I? I had a tantrum there with you. I was so dysregulated. And I can even articulate to my children sometimes at the time of the meltdown, like, I'm really dysregulated right now. So I'm taking breaths. I'm talking to myself about a mantra. We all have tics, like ways of self-soothing. So you'll notice that, you might start swaying or tapping or some kind of way to bring your body back to the physical, grounding, pushing your feet into the ground. And then if you need to tap out, tap out. And because I'm solo parenting, sometimes there isn't another parent here to tap out with. It is better for me to walk away and stand behind a closed door for a minute and breathe, even though my children are being abandoned, than to stand there and scream at them because I'm so dysregulated. Like if I need to remove myself, and that's what needs to happen, I'll explain to them, I'm super dysregulated right now. I need to go away and breathe because I don't want to lose it. And then I would sometimes have to actually leave the room. And I'm coming back to you. I'm coming back. So I hope that answers the question somewhat as to we have to get in touch with what makes us feel better. And then I also think when I talk about like, what is the unmet need? Why is a child behaving the way they're behaving? It's really important to recognize your own unmet needs. And like I said to you in the playground, what's the buildup? What's the buildup for you? What's your biting? What are you consistently doing? And what is leading up to that? And is it something that you can prevent?
Mm-hmm.
When I start losing it in my household, everyone goes, Mom, did you eat today? Sometimes it's not deep. It's just like you're hungry or 2 children are asking you for something at the same time and you need to pee and your phone is ringing. And sometimes you just got to stop and figure out what is my unmet need here before I get to the point where I'm so dysregulated I can't help you.
Yeah. And oh my gosh, I feel like that's so true. And everyone can probably relate to that. Even just the food thing. Like, I don't show up at work or with my spouse, even if I'm hungry, like, let alone a child who needs me and is having a really, really hard day. So that makes total sense. And it made me wonder about apologizing to your kids, because I think that's also kind of a newer thing that parents are doing. I don't think that was a philosophy back in the day, but do you encourage parents to apologize to their child if they do lose their cool or if they do need a minute? Like, what's your approach there?
So we call this rupture and repair, and it's really important. So like you say, previously a parent might lose it and then they don't apologize because they don't want to lose the upper hand. They don't want to be seen as, they'll follow through with something that makes no sense to them because they don't want to be seen as losing the power, losing the control. And so what we're doing now as more conscious parents is we're following through with repair. So it's not, I always say, it's not about what you did, it's about what you do after what you did. And the great thing is that the research says that to be a good parent, we only need to be tuned into our child 1/3 of the time. So if you're getting it right 1/3 of the time, you will have a securely attached child. So rupture is inevitable in relationships. And actually, if you were the kind of parent that never, ever lost it, you'd be doing your child a disservice. Because we need our children to see that we also are human. We get frustrated, we lose it, we become dysregulated, and see what we do afterwards. So resilience comes from relationships rupturing and then being able to repair them. And so it's about coming down to our child and going, you know what? When you were shouting at me, I was shouting at you to stop shouting at me. We were both dysregulated. It's not okay. The way I spoke to you is not okay. I was feeling angry, but I'm not allowed to shout at you. And that's something I'm working on. And I'm really sorry for what I said. And the great thing about kids is they're just so forgiving. And sometimes as a mom, I launch into this whole big apology and the kids are just like, yeah, cool. Like whatever. Are we going here now? Because it's a big thing for me. And mom guilt is such a thing. And I want to say
Yeah.
dad guilt as well, but particularly moms. We just feel guilty about everything. And we go to bed at night and we think about all the things we said to our child that was wrong, all the times we lost it. And we don't often think about, yeah, but I was really engaged in the park today. And like, I was tired, but I still played. I was still the dragon in the game or whatever, you know? And so it's okay to lose it. It's okay to be dysregulated. It's okay to shout when we can repair it afterwards and it doesn't become a consistent behavior.
Mm-hmm. And children, they say it all the time. It's like monkey see, monkey do. So if you can model not only how to self-regulate and co-regulate with them, but if you can model the behaviors you'd want to see, which is apologizing and coming at things calmly and as best they can, obviously, but like you're modeling the behavior for them so that they can learn that and do that for themselves in the future too.
Which is why it's really great if you can, when you are feeling dysregulated as a parent, to narrate. Oh, I'm so angry right now. I don't know what to do. I think I'm just going to take some deep breaths, because you're telling them the narrative of what's going on. Or, even to go, oh, I made this big mistake and now I'm feeling really embarrassed about it. But you know what? It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. And you know what? I'm just going to forgive myself for this. It's to talk that whole process out loud, because then the children are learning. You're not lecturing them. You're not telling them, they're learning. I just want to come back to the repair thing though, because one of the things that parents do often is to say sorry, say sorry. And I feel like that comes from pressure from other parents, because you feel like if your child doesn't say sorry, the other parent's going to feel like you don't care, you're letting them get away with it or whatever.
Yeah.
I've often seen that the say sorry thing, it elicits a big shame response in children. I'm not saying that children shouldn't apologize for their behavior, but one of the things I observed in my own kids is the idea that when I say sorry, they don't feel sorry, but they're going to say it because it gets them off the hook and like gets us out of the situation, and then it's done. If I'm really angry with my husband and he goes, that wasn't okay, say sorry. In the moment that I'm angry, I'm going to say sorry to you. But if I leave them, if I elicit empathy and I go, you know what, your brother's really hurting right now. He loves you so much. And when you speak to him in that tone of voice, it feels really horrible inside for him. And I leave it for like a minute or two. Generally, my 5-year-old will come on her own and go, I'm really sorry. And then she feels it. Because what are we trying to teach them? We're not teaching them to say sorry. Because what happens to adults that perpetrate and then just say sorry? We're teaching them, we want them to feel remorse. We want them to feel empathy.
Yeah.
We want them to process what they did. And if you feel the pressure from other parents, then apologize for your child. I'm
Right.
so sorry that she did that. And I can see that you're really hurt. Are you okay? And the
Yeah.
other thing with the apology as well, which I like to do with my kids, is how can I help? What can I do next? How do I repair this? So it's not just like, oh, sorry that happened. It's, I'm so sorry, and how can I help?
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, I'm just thinking here, like how wonderful the kids will be in the generation ahead if we all adopt some of these practices. I think these are all just so wonderful and even healing to hear about, and definitely things I want to take forward. If there was something you wish all parents stopped doing and something you wish all parents did, what would those two things be?
It's a really good question. So I think one of the things I wish parents would stop doing maybe is control over connection. So it's this idea that I can't change my mind, or I need to follow through with this, or I need to be in control here, because if I don't, my child's going to turn out to be a delinquent. And I think flexibility is really important in parenting and in leadership, and that actually sometimes it's okay to change your mind in the face of new evidence, or it's okay to be flexible, to not be so strict on your structure. And what I mean by that, like, let me give you an example. Yesterday, we live opposite a park. So my husband and I were taking the kids to the park, and I have Velcro babies. So they're touch babies. They just want to be touching me and carried all the time. And my back's a bit sore at the moment. So I said to my 3-year-old, I cannot carry you to the park. Either you can walk or your dad can carry you, but I cannot carry you to the park, and proceed meltdown, crying, etc. And I was like, no, this is like my body. I'm going to set a boundary here. He did let his dad pick him up. He was crying. And then halfway towards the park, I could see that he was distraught. He was beside himself. And I stopped for a minute and I went, he's so tired. He didn't nap today. He's absolutely exhausted. He's had a really rough day today. And you know what? He just wants me to carry him, and it's not that far. And when I get to the park, I can sit down and then he could sit on my lap. And so I did. I gave it. I said, it's okay, buddy, I'll carry you. And I think sometimes a parent might think, oh, well, if you do that, then every single time he's just going to think that he can cry and you can carry him. And I don't think that's the case. I don't think that he manipulates and thinks like that. And I think that it's okay if the next time he does that, and I can see that he actually would be okay walking and it is fine, I can still hold my boundary.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to be flexible. You don't need to engage in every power struggle. You don't have to turn up to every power struggle you're invited to. And I'm always like, is this the hill I'm prepared to die on? And sometimes the answer is yes. And when the answer is yes, then I'm like, I'm holding this boundary. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how much you scream. Like, this is really important to me. And sometimes it's like, actually, does it really matter? And we're so worried about setting a precedent. Like, if I do it just one time, then they're going to want me to do it every time. And I don't think that that's always the case. And I do think that you can set a boundary sometimes. And then when you realize that that boundary is maybe a bit unrealistic or ridiculous, or actually you're like, why does this even matter to me? You can change your mind.
Yeah, for sure. And then what about something you wish all parents did?
I think the biggest thing, particularly as a mother, is that you were built with a guidebook, and it's called intuition. And sometimes we let parenting experts and friends and family and that outdated advice dictate our parenting. And actually, like, you have this compass inside of you, which is why when you're told to let your child cry it out, you feel physically ill inside. Like, every fiber of your being is like, this is not right. Trust your intuition, because it will guide you. If the only thing you ever do is intuitively parent, you'll be okay. Because you have that primitive built-in intuition. And sometimes it gets really overwhelming when all these experts are telling you what to do, or your mother's offering unsolicited advice. And focus on connection. Focus on who your child is, not who you want them to be. We're so focused on who they're going to be in the future that we forget about who they are now. Like, I need them to be a functional member of society. But what's going on for them now? And focus less on their behavior and focus more on who they are. And it's not about shaping your child. It's about watching them unfold. It's about supporting them to unfold. And other thing I want to say is that if you're already at this point in this podcast, thanks for sticking with me, you're already a good parent. Like, have compassion for yourself. You're going to mess up. I mess up. You mess up. And I want you to know that if you're here, you're a good parent. The parents that need to be here are not the ones listening to the podcast. And so please just show yourself some compassion and understand that you're doing your best and you're showing up in the best way that you can with all the pressures that society's putting on you right now. And we are not meant to parent like this. We are not meant to parent in isolation like this.
Oh, I love that. And just all the compassion there. And you're right. It is so hard. Everyone says it, hardest job in the world. And I truly believe that because A, it's all consuming, but B, it's so important. Like, you think it is so important, and you feel ultimately responsible for how your kiddos are gonna turn out, not fully because they are their own people, but so much of our regulation and our ability to cope and manage stress comes from our parents and their ability to support us. So thank you for saying that, just all of the compassion you shared for parents, but also all the amazing wisdom and advice you shared today. I think I'm just coming away with so much more information and so excited to apply it. Where can people find you, get connected?
So I'm currently in the middle of writing a conscious parenting course, which should be out soon. So watch that space. But the primary place where I'm giving support right now is on Instagram, which is The Connected Parent. I'm sure you'll be able to put a link, the school connected _ parent. And of course, in all these podcasts, you really wish you could give parents the actual nitty gritty advice because it's all sounds so great. But if you go to my Instagram, then I offer examples where I say, when this happens, you can try this. Parenting is not a set of strategies, though. It's a relationship. And so even if you give someone all the strategies, if they're not primarily engaged in the relationship, it doesn't necessarily work. But so my Instagram is a place where you can, lots of tools and tips offered, then watch the space for the course. And then you can link my email as well if you need to email me. And then I do some one-on-one sessions as well, which I primarily do over the internet now, so I can actually be accessed anywhere in the world.
Amazing. Lexi, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ali.